Hello everyone, and welcome back to another solo spooky story. My name is Rob, and today I'll be your host. The solo spooky stories, as you all know by now, are just a short episode with just myself or Sue sometimes just talking about something that interests us. There's no kind of back and forth conversation, just a shorter episode of something that we've just found quite interesting. Myself and Suze were recently on another podcast, actually. We were guests on it, the No Bodies podcast. They invited us to come on and talk, Lonely and Susie, and it was a really great time. But we were talking about a topic, and in talking about our introductions and things like that, they asked us about experiences that we have, and one of the things that came to mind that I had completely forgotten about was the Edinburgh Vaults, or the Underground City, or the South Bridge Vaults, I believe they're also called. But basically, it's this kind of, exactly what it says on the tin, an underground city vaults system, basically, in Edinburgh, in Scotland, that are famous now for being a haunted, kind of eerie place. And even from what I've seen online, when they were around in their kind of prime, they were also an eerie sort of place. But in talking about that area and kind of remembering things and all about it on the No Bodies podcast, I haven't really been able to stop thinking about it. So I figured, what is, the best place to talk about this sort of stuff is on this. So that's what we're going to do today. So we're going to briefly talk about the history of it, the background, the use, and then we'll touch into the kind of paranormal side of things as well. And you can let me know what you think. And yeah, we'll go from there. So the Edinburgh Vaults, also known as the South Bridge Vaults, they're a fascinating and eerie part of Edinburgh's history. The vaults were constructed in the late 18th century, specifically under the arches of the South Bridge, which was completed in 1788. So they're, we're talking here 18th century, not too far in the past, but, a reasonable amount of time. Like it's an interesting period in history as well. So the bridge was a fairly ambitious project, and it was aimed at connecting the old town with the University of Edinburgh on the south side, and to serve as Edinburgh's first purpose-built shopping street. So pretty interesting when you think about it, especially with kind of a modern lens. This is kind of connecting the old and the new, and trying to, I suppose, bring Edinburgh into the more like modern times, even for the time. So initially, these vaults were built underneath the bridge, and the vaults were used as a means to kind of house taverns or workshops for cobblers, other tradesmen, as well as storage spaces for merchants. So pretty, good use for them. You've got the space here, you may as well use them. However, as all these things go, due to rushed construction and lack of waterproofing, the vaults began to flood, leading to their abandonment by businesses as early as 1795. So basically within 7 years, they're already starting to be abandoned. And for anyone that doesn't know, Edinburgh, Scotland in general, is quite a wet place. You really need good waterproofing in these areas. So if there's no waterproofing in here, I'd imagine it was an absolute nightmare trying to maintain this sort of area. So it definitely makes sense why merchants were abandoning them, especially if they have materials in there that are getting damaged due to like dampness and stuff like that. Totally understand why they do this. So as the Industrial Revolution progressed, the area where the vaults are located, the Cowgate area, became one of Edinburgh's most impoverished slums. So yeah, just economic decline and downturn happened, and this disadvantaged area basically became worse. So the abandoned vaults, then naturally homeless people were starting to look for areas to shelter themselves, and the vaults were a perfect place for it. They effectively became this refuge for the homeless, a hotbed for criminal activities, and according to rumours, they were a temporary storage for corpses from body snatchers and things like that. And Edinburgh has this really dark and unique history with body snatchers. So I suppose it's only right and appropriate that body snatchers would also be involved here. So it was the art of, digging up graves and things like that, or going into morgues and stealing recently deceased people and then selling them to universities, scientists, hospitals and things like that to practice on, or for other nefarious purposes that I'm not going to get into, but that's kind of the Spark Notes version of a body snatcher. So, the vaults just became this notorious, I suppose, area, and quickly became famous for just this rundown area where you don't really go and you just leave it alone. And that is kind of how they remained. So the vaults effectively fell into disrepair throughout the 1800s, 19th century, and then into the 20th century, they became effectively completely abandoned. They were briefly used again in the 1940s. Around World War II, they were used as temporary kind of air raid shelters and things like that, but for the most part, they were completely abandoned and effectively forgotten about by the public. This is until around the 1980s, kind of early to mid 1980s, during an excavation, all of a sudden, these vaults were rediscovered. There were artifacts found, like toys, medicine bottles, and plates, which effectively proved beyond all reasonable doubt that people did actually live here. Like poor people and disadvantaged people did actually live in these vaults, and it kind of challenged a theory at the time that said, no one actually did live there. You know, it's all rumors. This pretty much proved it without any, as I said, beyond reasonable doubt that people did live there. So nowadays, the vaults are a fairly popular attraction. I've actually been there myself, and they're fairly popular for those that are interested in history, but also, you know, judging by what this podcast is, as you can imagine, there's also a paranormal side to it as well. So the vaults are accessible only through guided tours now. And from, you know, as these things go, these tours are mostly around emphasizing the kind of spooky and mysterious nature associated with the vaults now. So as I said, there is a paranormal history to these vaults, and it is fascinating. So the vaults are notorious, to say the least, for their paranormal activity. Over the years, many have reported encounters with supernatural and, I suppose, dark beings in these dark chambers. And there's been tales of all sorts of things, ranging from apparitions to unexplained sounds, feelings of dread, and full-bodied apparitions and things like that. So I'm just going to briefly touch on some of the more minor appearances, and then I'm going to talk about the main one, the main one that it's famous for. So we're going to start off with the crying child. So there's an area within the vaults that's known as the White Room. And the White Room is it's area where visitors have reported hearing the sounds of a child crying. And some believe that this is the spirit of a child who lived and died in the harsh conditions of the vault. So people have come in and just they hear these noises and they can't explain them. Having been in the vaults myself, they're very, very cramped. They're very, very dark, and it's totally believable that you could hear sounds down here. You know, not necessarily supernatural sounds, but I would imagine that sound could carry quite far here. So if you even heard maybe a child outside, I could maybe see, due to the shape of the vault with like curved ceilings made of stone and things like that, that sounds could get thrown around quite easily. But that's, you know, neither here nor there for the moment. So moving on from the crying child, we have the very original name of the aggressive spirit. So this entity, shockingly, is known for its aggressive behavior, particularly towards women, which is not okay. It's far more seedy than it should be. And it's said to be found in one of the larger rooms, and some have reported to have experienced physical harm. Really kind of seedy when you think about how it's kind of aggressive towards women and things like that. But yes, some people have reported being physically harmed by this entity. They've, you know, been shoved or potentially been scratched by it. And yeah, he's just a general scumbag basically. So wouldn't be looking to spend any time with him. Moving on then, we also have the Pipers. So legend has it that two pipers, obviously it's Scotland, so I'm assuming it's bagpipers, entered the vaults and never returned, which is a classic ghost story when you think about it. It's got all the hallmarks. You know, these two pipers, obviously I'd say they're mad attractive as well. Go in there, playing their music, never return, and no one knows what happened to them. So yeah, the legend is that they entered, never returned, and now their music can be sometimes heard echoing through the chambers, adding to the atmosphere of the area. Again, it's very believable that it's most likely just a case of sound getting thrown around. If you've been to Edinburgh, you will know the amount of people playing bagpipes outside is insane, so I'm not too sure about this one. And then our penultimate ghost entity, creature, whatever you want to call it, is someone known as the Watcher. So the Watcher is said to observe visitors from the shadows, and while it isn't as aggressive as the aggressive spirit, its presence is often felt as very kind of oppressive, as I've seen it described online. So even though it may not necessarily confront you or harm you in any way, you feel like you don't belong when you're around it, and it does not want you there. And yes, so these apparitions all kind of lend to this overall narrative that these vaults are not only haunted, but possibly one of the most haunted places in Scotland. Yeah, it's just when you go into the place, you immediately do kind of feel on edge. And I'm assuming that's probably also got a lot to do with how they play up the tours and things like that. Like, they want you to feel on edge going in here. And there is no better way to feel on edge than with the final ghost, the final entity that it's most famous for, and potentially the most terrifying part of it. So we're going to talk about, finally, the entity known as Mr. Boots, which even the name alone, I don't know why, just leaves me feeling deeply unsettled. It's not one for me. It just, yeah, Mr. Boots. It sounds like the name that like a child would give to like a demon, basically. It's not okay. So, Mr. Boots is one of the most notorious ghostly figures associated with the Edinburgh Vaults. He is described as this tall, imposing figure, often seen wearing this dirty blue coat and heavy, worn-out leather boots, obviously given the name Mr. Boots. His presence is one of the most active in the vaults, and he's known for his incredibly territorial and standoffish behaviour. Visitors and ghost tour guides have reported various encounters with Mr. Boots, and he's said to keep a close eye on the living, and people have said that they feel like he's glaring at them, that he basically stands in doorways or off kind of hidden away and watches people as they're in there. Some have even said that they see him pacing in rooms throughout the tunnels, which is terrifying. And then others have claimed to have heard him actually growling at them. Some have even gone so far as to say that they've heard him saying "get out" to them in this gruff kind of growling manner. And yeah, it kind of to top all this off, then people have reported physical marks on their bodies after the tours as well, which is not a great time for anyone, especially if you are going into this area and, you know, you're confronted by this entity or whatever you want to call it, like let alone it not wanting you there, but it also leaving marks on you is no fun at all. So the true identity of Mr. Boots remains a mystery, but some have speculated that he could have been a smuggler, a thief, a body snatcher, or maybe a bit of both, all of the above, whatever you want to decide. Not the most above board character though. And that some have said and speculated that he's guarding his merchandise, whatever that may be, and that during the time when the vaults were open for illegal activities, that he was basically making sure that no one would touch his stuff effectively. So, yeah, no one really knows, but I suppose his kind of lore adds to this, that he's just a general piece of shit, effectively, and that he's not a fan of anyone being in there. So, yeah, it's, you know, people have generally said that he's not a good character to be around, and that he doesn't want anyone there. To give him a slight, you know, bit of a saving grace, there's one theory that I've seen online as well, which I thought I'd mention, but I'm not so sure about it. So some people have speculated that there's a reason why Mr. Boots is so protective of the vaults, and it's because he's guarding the White Room, which is where that child is. And people have said that he's basically guarding or acting as some sort of watchman to make sure that the child remains safe, or that it's not scared or something like that. So that would be nice if it is the case, but with him being generally very aggressive to people and growling and things like that, regardless of if his intentions are noble, it's still fucking terrifying. So, you know, still going to be a no from me. So yeah, Mr. Boots has basically become this integral part of the lore surrounding the vaults. His story has definitely like added to the chilling atmosphere of the place, and when I was there, I certainly heard about him. And I actually have my own experience to talk about here, so this is actually the reason why I'm talking about it, because I was remembering it all when we featured on the No Bodies podcast. So yeah, I went there when I was about 12. I don't necessarily believe in all of this sort of stuff, but especially when I was 12, I think I probably actually believed less than I may even now. But yeah, when I was there, really cool place, really interesting. It was part of like a school group. We were looking at the place and, you know, being brought around, and obviously it was at night and all that sort of stuff, the usual. There was a girl in our group. When we went into one specific room, she said that she felt really uneasy and that she started feeling sick and nauseous and things like that. So she was actually taken outside, didn't finish the tour, and Someone else just kind of said that they felt very uneasy and that they weren't okay. I guess maybe picked up on the kind of weird atmosphere in the place just because people were a little bit on edge. Also, we were like 12 years old, so, you know, naturally you're probably a little bit more inclined to feel a bit off in these sort of places, especially with stories of ghosts and all that. But I didn't really think anything of it. And I didn't think anything really of it at all until we got back to our hotel. And when I was getting changed, I discovered that I had 3 large, what looked like scratch marks, basically going in a diagonal from right to bottom left across my shoulder to the base of my back, which still, even thinking about it now, really unsettles me, and I'm not a fan. But, you know, I don't know what it was. I could have just been leaning against something and that's the mark that it left. But, you know, I can't help but feel that it did very much so look like scratch marks. And I am not about that at all. But also, with it being a school trip, I didn't say anything, just tried to be the big man and spent the rest of the time, the 2 other days that we were there, feeling generally a little bit more on edge than I had the subsequent day before. So yeah, I don't know what it was, but you know, I just wanted to add my own experience in there as well. So I hope you've enjoyed this short history of the Edinburgh Vaults. I know I really enjoyed going there, and I probably would go again, but I'd probably be a little bit more wary of scratches and things like that on my back. But yeah, as I said, let me know what you think of this. Let me know what you think of Mr. Boots. Do you think that he's being a little bit more sinister, or do you like the idea that he's protecting this ghost child? Be really curious to see what you think. You can reach out to us on Instagram at the spookyaf pod, or you can email us your thoughts as well at the spookyafpodcast@gmail.com. I'd be curious to see where you fall down on this. You know, is he good? Is he bad? What is it? And if you have your own experiences in the vaults, or if you have any thoughts on what may have happened to me, let me know. I'd love to hear from you. But with that, I hope you're having a great day whenever it is that you're listening to this, and we'll see you in the next one. Take it easy, guys.